opportunity to address the Millbrook and Cavan Historical Society. Now I'd like to tell you in a roundabout way how I came to write the script for Fourth Line Theatre's upcoming production of The Tilko Strike. Anyway, so I've had a long and diverse writing career, which spans 6 decades, and I was employed as a journalist for 25 years. I worked on a weekly newspaper and a daily. I also worked on 2 weekly news magazines, one regional, one national, and the latter being Maclean's, where I was a senior writer from start to finish. And I left Maclean's in June 2001, and I've been a freelance writer ever since. Freelance writing is not for everyone. It's a perpetual scramble, and you sort of take whatever you can get or whatever happens to come in the door in the way of work. You're bound to make a lot less money than your peers who are employed, but you're going to have a lot more fun. And I started writing books at Maclean's, and I continued as a freelancer and have in fact written 10 books of popular history on a wide array of subjects. Most writers and journalists will find some area or subject that they can specialize in. It is a way to develop expertise, acquire a reputation, and ideally to build your brand. But I've made a virtue of versatility. I've never specialized in any one subject or area of interest. However, I did find a niche that has proved to be fulfilling and financially relatively lucrative. And this niche is commemorative history. So in the fall of 1982, I published a history of the first 100 years of Stanley Cup competition. I later wrote centennial histories of the Montreal Canadiens and the National Hockey League. And when I started freelancing, I landed a commission to write the first 50 years of the Canadian generic pharmaceutical industry. And this made me think I should look for similar opportunities, and I was fortunate enough to land 2 further commissions, one to write 50 years of the St. Lawrence Seaway, and the other to write the first 50 years of Trent University. And this brings me back to Tilko. I interviewed dozens of people for the Trent book, among them Joan Sangster, a distinguished Canadian historian. And Joan made her mark with groundbreaking research on the working lives of women employed in Peterborough factories from the 1930s through the 1960s. And during our interview, she told me about this strike at Tilko and why it became a landmark labor dispute. I read the paper, and I had one of those eureka moments. I said, this is a natural story for Fourth Line Theatre. And I knew it was a fit because I'd been coming to Fourth Line off and on since the 2nd season. Now, just because you have a good idea doesn't necessarily mean you can bring it to fruition, especially when you're doing something you've never done before, like writing a script. Fortunately, I had a number of things going for me. One being, having made a virtue of versatility throughout my career, I was not inhibited by a fresh challenge. Second, I had a framework of fact to depend on as I was developing the script. I read the Examiner coverage of the strike from start to finish, and I interviewed several women who were involved in the strike. I also interviewed the late Pat Baker, who was a young salesman at the time and later became a part owner of the company. So many of the scenes that you'll see in the play this summer are based on actual events. The other thing I had going for me that I was able to draw upon was personal experience. The play is set in Peterborough in the 1960s, and I was a teenager growing up in Peterborough in the 1960s. So I was writing about a time and a place with which I was intimately acquainted. I was writing about factory and the people who worked there. As a university student, I had jobs in a number of Peterborough factories, so I understood the working environment and the people that worked in factories. This seems amazing to me, and it is a sign of how much times have changed. But as a university student, I had 7 factory jobs. I worked at Outboard Marine 3 times, once on a snowmobile line, another time on a chainsaw line, and a third time in a warehouse. I had 2 jobs at Quaker Oats, and I worked briefly at a Domtar packaging plant, which was on Park Street South, where the Staples outlet now stands, and I worked very briefly at a bathtub factory in Stratford. Collaborated with many writers and editors over my career. including some of the best in the country. But I can honestly say that working with Kim has been one of the most gratifying collaborations of my career. We began in early 2016 with a concise summary of the story that I had written based on Joan Sangster's paper. I wrote a first draft and then a second draft. Then over the course of 5 days in August 2018, we held a reading of the script at the Winslow Farm with the cast of that summer's productions serving as readers. We went through additional drafts and then put the material to the test at a 5-day workshop in early March 2020. This was my first workshop, and it was both a nerve-wracking and exhilarating experience. We began with scene-by-scene readings with our 10-member cast. At the end of each scene, Kim would say, "Comments," and I would sit, waiting anxiously, and hope the scene in question made it through the round intact. We resurrected it last fall and went to work on it again. It's been a long process to get this close to production, but it's been great. With each new draft and each round of revisions, I could see something better emerging. As a writer, you can't expect more than that.